In a recent video we looked at my Kiev 4 Soviet-made rangefinder camera, which I liked as an object, but there were a number of points that made it somewhat less satisfying to use than I'd expected. I'll put a link to that video down in the description. At that time I'd already run 2 films through the camera, but the second film hadn't made its way to the lab for processing. That second film is now back from the lab, and I'm much happier with the results this time round. The first film was Ilford FP4, shot at its box speed of 125 ISO, whereas the second film was still FP4, but I pushed it one stop to 250 ISO. That difference of one stop, along with the fact it wasn't shot quite so much in the depths of winter, made all the difference, and I was much happier with the sharpness of the Jupiter 8M lens once it was stopped down a little more. However, there was still one huge glaring problem: light leaks. And of course a faster film and more ambient light will always show up light leaks more, so this wasn't such a surprise after I'd seen the first film. When I first got the camera, I'd replaced the light seals for the back, plus a couple of other areas where I could see light getting through. I'd also checked that the original baffles in the rangefinder were in place, so wherever the light was getting in, it wasn't obvious. I was reasonably sure that the light wasn't getting in through the back, partly because I'd already replaced the seals, but additionally because I used the camera in a half case, which doesn't guarantee no light will get through, but it does make it slightly less likely. So I've taken the top off again to see if I can spot any potential areas where light can get through to the film. The light leaks are always on the bottom left of the image, which means I need to be looking somewhere on the top edge as the image is inverted on the film. The leak could be happening before the film gets to the window, or after as it makes its way onto the take-up spool, or even while it's in the window itself, so I need to look for anything along that top edge. I'm still suspicious that light might be getting past the sprocket drive gear somehow, although I've not been able to spot it with the top fitted. There was light getting through the massive gap between the panels here, but I blocked that when I first got the camera, so that won't be the problem. If I turn the light off and shine a torch through the rangefinder window, it's clear to see that light can make its way to the area above the sprocket gear. And if I shine a light downwards towards the sprocket drive shaft, and I've put a bit of insulation tape to stop light creeping over the top, it takes a bit of time to find the correct angle, but there you can see the light making its way through to the film chamber. And if I turn my main light back on and angle it away a little, you can now see where the light is getting through in relation to the sprocket gear. Obviously it still requires any light coming through the rangefinder window to be reflected off something to get down there, but that seems to be the most likely cause of the problem. But there are more potential leaks in the mirror box area. Not that this camera has a mirror, but the space between the lens and the shutter anyway. If I turn the light off again and shine my torch downwards, once I get the correct angle, there's a little pinprick of light reflecting off the back of the focusing helicoid. I really don't think this could be significant enough to expose the film, because it would only be there while the shutter was open, but there's still a vague possibility, particularly when you see that the wires from the exposure meter, which sits above the area where I was just shining the torch, let some light in when I shine the torch towards the meter display window. And there's more light that can creep into that area through the edges of the selenium cell. I've put a bit of insulation tape on again to block light from coming over the top, but as before some light can light pipe through the unmasked area of the cell straight into the area above the non-existent mirror box. And still it carries on. This camera leaks like a holy bucket. If I shine a torch through the viewfinder window, it can make its way straight towards the cutout for the shutter release catch. As always, I've applied a bit of insulation tape to stop light creeping over the top, and if I hold up a piece of tracing paper you can see the light hitting it. I'm not sure if the bulge of the meter would completely block the route here, but if any light can make its way to the shutter catch, it now has a path through to the space between the shutter and the film, as you can see here. So I'm going to add some sort of masking or light seals to the area above the mirror box, and maybe a bit above the viewfinder, and another bit along the back edge here. Right, that's most of the new seals in place. I've put a ring of foam round each of the meter wires so there's no light getting through there anymore. And then on the top of the main chassis you've got the original bit of black card here. Then I've added some foam above the viewfinder, a strip along the back edge that will hopefully stop any light getting to the shutter latch, and foam over the gaps into the non-existent mirror box area. I didn't film this next bit, but the baffle that's supposed to stop light getting down to the sprocket gear is in place. And if I rotate it, you can see that it's a disc with a flat cut out of it, and it's in good shape rather than being damaged or missing completely. But when the rear shutter cover is in place, there's a honking great gap between the chassis and the cover, which light can get through. So I've fitted a bit of foam to seal that gap, and now when I shine a torch, no light gets through to the sprocket. It occurred to me at this point that some people might want to see how the Kiev comes apart to get at these light leak areas. So before I replace the light seal along the top edge where the camera back sits, I'll take the shutter cover off again. There are 4 screws to remove. The one in the top right is shorter than the others. Then once these are out, the screw that secures the bottom of the sprocket drive shaft needs to be slackened just enough so the shutter cover can wriggle past the sprocket. At this point the film guide roller will also fall out. The longer shaft goes towards the top end. Now you can just carefully wriggle the cover plate to get it past the sprocket, maybe slackening the screw a bit more in the process. It seems fiddly, particularly as I'm working around the tripod at the moment, but all of a sudden it just comes off. Anyway, that's the cover removed, and you can now see the rather crude shutter curtain latch at the top here, and the bit of foam I added to stop the light leaking down to the sprocket gear. Following on from that, I've reassembled the camera so I can now show you how to remove the top cover. The first thing is to remove the 3 screws in the film advancing knob. With these out, you can remove the crown, the shutter button, and the spring beneath. Next, remove the 3 screws securing the film advancing knob, and sorry if my hand's getting in the way of the camera. After that, there are 2 screws securing the shutter speed dial, which will allow you to remove the dial along with the shims beneath. In my case there are 2 shims, but that might vary from one camera to the next. Then remove the 2 screws in the top of the film canister chamber, and the single screw over in the right hand side of the take-up spool chamber. The film rewind shaft needs to come out by undoing the screw in the centre of the drive dog. Then there's a washer, a spring, and the dog itself. The rewind shaft now just simply pulls out. There's also a fibre washer to remove. Mine is sticking in place due to a little bit of grease that's lubricating it, but it's better to remove it now than have it fall out later and get lost. Lastly, there's this screw that sits beneath the shutter speed dial. You can't undo it all the way because it hits the top trim, so you have to ease the top section upwards, then undo that screw the rest of the way. Why the cutout for that screw head isn't big enough is beyond me, but as I said in the previous video, the fit of some of the parts on this camera is absolutely terrible. Anyway, that's the top section removed. And finally, now the shutter cover is back in position, I've refitted the foam over the gaps between the cover and the camera chassis. The gap on the left is plenty big enough for light to get through, should any light get into that void above, and the gap on the right is big enough to drive a truck through. Anyway, the camera is now back together, and I've replaced the foam seal that sits in the channel that the top edge of the camera back presses against, so we're all ready to test it with another roll of film. I'm going to use colour this time, even though I originally planned to only shoot black and white with this camera. But should the light leak persist, colour film should help identify whether the light is coming from the front or the back. Theoretically, the light leak should look orange if it's passing through the orange film base from the back, and white if it's falling straight onto the emulsion from the front. I'm sure someone will pipe up and say that there's supposed to be a light baffle behind the rangefinder mirror. That baffle is there, but it's about as good as a chocolate fireguard. I think that will do for this video. I'll probably make a follow-up once I've shot the next roll of film, unless I'm so fed up with the camera by then that I can't be bothered anymore. If you've enjoyed watching, please like the video and maybe even subscribe to the channel, not forgetting to click on the bell icon so you get notifications when future videos are released. That's it for now, so thanks for watching and I'll see you in a future video.